Okay, welcome back everyone for, I believe it's our episode 6 of our live feed with the relationship series. My name is Gina Spatero, and this is my brother Sam Spatero. And before we begin, please don't forget to hit the like button, notification bell, and please subscribe to our channel. This just helps further grow our content and also gives you an opportunity to stay in the loop with what we are creating. A lot of it has to do with current trends or just matters that most people are dealing with in a day-to-day life. Some of our clients come to us with the very similar concerns or questions. So we just want to be able to share those with you as well. So how's your week been, Sam?
It's been exceptionally well.
Excellent.
We both haven't caught the corona yet, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, it's pretty intense right now, isn't
Yeah, I
it?
know. They just came out with if some of you from Ontario hit that like button, I know that we just found out that there was a couple more cases in Ontario today. So hopefully, everyone's being safe and they get this thing under control.
Yeah, it's funny because, and this is something I think it's going to tie into our topic tonight. Now that you mention it, it's taking media for face value, the things
Yeah.
that they say versus the things that you should probably research and understand a little bit on your own before actually kind of believing everything that is said, because there's so many underlying truths to things, and if you believe things at first glance, you may be a victim to what is actually out there. So it's very important to question things. And I think tonight is the whole topic basically on questioning what is actually being said in the media. And if you don't mind, I'm going to kick it off because it actually um, kind of coincides with a conversation I had this week with one of my girlfriends. And we were just talking back and forth about, her current relationship and how things are going. And she popped out this term, toxic masculinity, and she said, well, he's portraying some of these toxic masculine behaviors. And I'm like, okay. So I just let the conversation kind of unfold. And then I asked her afterwards, I'm like, what makes masculinity toxic? And she didn't really have an answer for it. And I said, is this like a term that you've heard that you're kind of just relating it to something that's happening in your relationship because it's not going the way you desire? And really, there was no conversation because there was no understanding as to what masculinity really is. It's just something that she's believing because the media, for sure. I mean, I've heard it a bazillion times that masculinity now is becoming toxic. What are your views on it before we dive into this?
So
Because you're a man, right?
it's really a privilege to live in a Western culture, in a Western society. I mean, we have so many privileges that a lot of the second and third world countries don't have.
Right.
But I think that we're really just getting lost. And some of the things that are proving this is the divorce rate.
Mm-hmm.
How suicide rates are going higher from people that are being in relationships, especially from men. And the whole question is, why is this?
Yeah.
I mean, if we have all these movements, we have all these new and unique opportunities where we can express ourselves so freely, but yet we're so loosely using words like toxic masculinity, toxic femininity. We have so many, we're shaming uh, cultures and religions and and sexes, and it's just like, I just think we're really getting lost along the way. And I think really what it comes down to, we did a video on this not too long ago, is I really don't believe there's anything that you can use as a term called toxic masculinity. If anything, there's toxic behavior, and that goes for both sexes. So if we can maybe address what are some of the common toxic behaviors that men display, then let's have that conversation.
Yeah.
But to directly, say masculinity is toxic,
Mm-hmm.
especially in today's society where we're worried about, offending people and, race, and really
Mhm.
trying to create equality, this is kind of taking things in the opposite direction.
Right. So basically, I got some bullet points here for three conversation pieces around this. So basically, my whole perspective on it is, and I think the first one is characteristic versus behaviors. So basically, they're adjectives versus verbs, right? So like describing versus actions. And I mean, when you talk about masculinity and femininity, we all know that men and women both inherit both sides of those characteristics. A woman, like we said before, also has masculine and feminine characteristics. Whereas a man also has, the feminine and the masculine characteristics, but it shows up more one versus the other based on your gender at times or how you have been raised or, certain environmental factors. But it's
Trauma,
trauma,
etc.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think it's understanding that when we're coining masculinity as toxic, we're coining characteristics when we need to really look at behaviors in both men and women. For example, abusive behaviors. The actions of abuse are toxic. The actions of infidelity are toxic. Those things are toxic. But having someone who's competitive or nurturing or kind, like those are describing factors of someone who are their characteristics. It's not something that they're actually behaving like, if that makes sense. It's not like they're actually doing it unto others, right? It's just who they are. But it's when those characteristics become behaviors, um, that's when we have to really open our eyes and see what is actually toxic and harmful to others. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But you did kind of reiterate it a little bit before. It's identifying the behavior. And I'm sure you've seen these behaviors before in multiple couples, and verbal abuse, neglect, like those things are not good. Those things are very detrimental to anybody, as a child, as an adult. It can have a lot of effects mentally, physically, emotionally on someone's well-being, right? But it doesn't mean that because someone possesses certain characteristics that they're toxic. I don't know how you feel about that.
So I think the whole question is, how does it start? And
Okay.
so, since we're on the conversation of toxic masculinity, well, which to me is just toxic behavior. Well, how does a man develop toxic behavior? And I think this really starts at home. And if some of you are watching this and you're thinking about having kids or you have kids, it starts when boys are boys. And first of all, men are wired differently than women. You both use both sides of your brain. We use one. We are naturally driven to go out and conquer. That was what we were designed for a long time ago when you guys stayed back in the meadow with the kids
Mm-hmm.
and collected the berries and got the water. And we were out risking our lives with the saber-tooth tiger to bring food home so the family didn't die. Right. So we are naturally driven to be achievers, to conquer, to impress women. But at the same time, too, where did we get lost?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where it happens. And if we could talk about men's suicide rate being 3 times higher, and I know for myself at times when I've displayed toxic masculine behavior, it really has to come down to a few things. Think about how society or parents mold boys. We're
Mm-hmm.
taught to be tough. We're taught to suck it up. We're taught to, you know, not really discover, how to use our feelings and emotions. And we develop these behaviors because we really don't know how to channel that energy. I just coached a couple, and actually might get teared talking about this. And they just recently lost a baby,
Mm-hmm.
and the wife was consulting with me, looking for some coaching because her husband became very distant, quiet, wasn't being as engaged, and she just couldn't understand, why he was choosing this type of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Well, ladies, here's how men are wired. If you're not happy, they blame themselves. And when they see that they can't help you and you're suffering and you're in pain, they don't know what to do, and they feel so completely powerless and useless in that moment that they'll choose behaviors because they weren't taught how to communicate how they feel. So they show you through expression, true body, through anger, through excessive use of swear words. So, how does that start? It starts at a young age. We need to start educating boys that, communicating how you feel is courageous. It's actually a unique ability, so that when they get older and they're in a relationship, they display positive masculine behavior. So this is one subject that kind of, how do we get here? How are men toxic? Well, it's a behavior, and it all started long ago. So let's not blame the man or the adult. Let's blame the teaching at a very young age. Let's blame how society portrays how little boys are supposed to be and what men end up becoming like because of these sorts of things.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because we all know that a lot of the times boys and girls interact differently based on nature. And so, because there's so many sides of the coin on this, do we make boys too emotional and too attached to their feminine, if that makes sense? So what's the balance there? While boys, because I mean, innately, are men not meant to carry more of the masculine traits rather than the feminine, and harness the masculine instead of the feminine? Like, have the feminine there, of course, because there's always a need for it. Um, but what's the balance? What do you think the balance is as a man, in harnessing a boy with the masculine traits, but encouraged to attach himself to the feminine when needed?
So, here, and I'll use an example of my own life.
Okay.
So I went through a hard time years ago after, I lost Jerry, and then I was having another kid, and I was going through a business struggle at the time. And I became very distant and cold and was non-communicative. And I was at the lowest of my lows. And
Mm-hmm.
so it didn't make me any less of a man. I was still trying to conquer and achieve and make as much income and grow my business and try to find new and unique ways to be innovative.
Right.
But at the same time, too, I was struggling with not accepting that I had hurt.
Right.
And to speak about it didn't make you less of a man.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So how do we avoid that next man who might be watching this, drive his car into the side of a highway, or, a local gentleman who just hung himself, or someone pop pills, or, cut off the exhaust and fill up the car
Right.
and die? Well, being a man is also knowing, it's embracing, if you want to call it the feminine, or that it's not a weakness to share how you're feeling. You really have to be in tune that even though we are men, it's also important that we need to understand that how we feel also matters too. It's not just about what we conquer. It's not just about what we accomplish, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all about just embracing that vulnerability of it. Doesn't make me any less of a man or a boy. Like, that's how I feel. I'm going to take my own personal experience. I'm going to take experiences of cases that I've watched and studied. And this is the breakthrough. This is how people find that unique ability in today in society, especially where toxic masculinity, there's no such thing. How do we direct this behavior? Instead of putting all that energy towards addressing men as being toxic,
Yeah.
let's address it on what is making that behavior exist? How do we solve that? That's what should be the focus.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next topic. So, why masculinity isn't toxic? Because men and women are different. We are meant to be different. We are meant to be complementary pieces to one another. And the more we push what is toxic and what is not, what is accepted and what is not, then we're creating more of a divide constantly, 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 constantly. It's, and I'm going to post this, it's fighting against being complementary, and it's pushing for a divide. Do you believe that if we continue to coin this even with the feminine and the masculine, and we continue to coin masculinity in men as being toxic. What are we teaching boys about their innate nature, about their innate ability to be a man and and love that masculine part of them, when we continue to push the part that what is beautifully theirs is toxic?
Well, I think for starters, I think I go back to our childhood and our family structure.
Hmm.
There was never this confusion between the roles of the men and the women. It was very complementary.
Right.
So in today's society, there's a struggle between, like, my daughter goes to school, and every year they have this event. It's called Girl Strong, right? Which is fantastic,
Hmm.
right? But and she has a book in her library at home where it has like a girl with this like rugby eyes, and I mean that's great if that's what you want to do, but
Right.
it's also okay to be a woman.
Of course.
Like by nature, you are designed differently, as are men. So I think really what it comes down to is we just need to appreciate that we are uniquely different.
Hmm.
And it's about embrace. Like if you have a boy who's, like our boys tonight, they were fighting, and I tell them, like, just let them be.
Yeah.
They don't want to play with dolls. That's their nature. I mean, if you want to call it toxic, where like they're bashing each other's heads, headbutting, and they're taking it to that extreme, okay, then that could be toxic. But it's in their behavior to want to do this. It's in their
Hmm.
nature to want to do this. So how do we embrace our unique qualities without dividing? It's just we really just need to today, especially, just appreciate and harness in what makes a boy unique,
Right.
what makes a man unique, and let's not try to be stronger than him by making that he wants to be a certain way toxic, but rather embrace and appreciate the unique differences that they have.
Hmm.
And I see it all the time in numerous relationships where you know the man in a relationship is more like the son
Hmm.
rather than the husband or the boyfriend.
Hmm.
you know you know
Why do you
it,
think that is? Because it happens a lot. Why do you think that that role has shifted from the man being the man and the it being a little bit more submissive, if that makes sense, you
Well,
know?
I'm going to say, and you touched base on this right in the beginning. How did Hitler do what he did?
Mhm,
He didn't just come about. It actually started through media,
mhm,
right? And I'm going to say media, and especially in Western society, is having a huge negative shift. Like, look at the new Gillette commercial.
mhm.
Like you're talking about like making men look like stupid dogs who cook barbecues and fight all the time.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that is the portrayal of like how they're trying to perceive. And how
Correct.
did we get here? So the whole thing is, how do we go back? I can understand how women, might feel the way they do, especially if there's abuse and whatever. I mean, that is never tolerable.
Never.
But at the end of the day, we're kind of like reversing the abuse back. And then what's going to happen? The equilibrium is going to balance back and go back the other way. What we need to do is really just focus in and harness in on what matters. We need
Mhm.
to learn to appreciate one another for our differences. It's not that
Right.
we're intended to be equal, but
Mhm,
how do we learn to finally just uniquely appreciate what we're different at, what we're good at?
mhm. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think when you are in a relationship, and I mean, it can be anything, because I mean, there's struggles in the workplace, there's struggles in an intimate relationship, there's struggles within friendships. And it's that competitiveness always to show, well, I can do it too. Or, you know, men and women are inherently biologically different, you know? Um, Men most of the time are stronger than women, body size indicates that. There's certain things that women, probably most women, won't want to do that men will do, and vice versa. Women can have children and men cannot, like these are inherent things that men and women are characteristically different. And I think we need to understand the whole thing is it's okay to be different. And it's okay to be complementary to one another instead of always pushing the struggle of trying to compete and trying to prove that one is better than the other. And that's where the whole harmony piece comes in, right? Where it's like once you can do that and you can find the peace and the harmony, then everything, the flow just happens, right? And it's just the perspective and the struggle just disappears so quickly because you kind of live in what you feel most comfortable in. And I'm not saying that a woman can't do certain things nor a man. However, when we are inherently not being true to our nature, I feel like there's a struggle internally as well as externally.
And I really like that you said this, fighting against being complimentary and pushing for divide.
Of course.
In our family, it was very complimentary.
Right.
Now, where it can be pushed for divide is if both people in the relationship leading energies are the same. If you
Correct.
have a female who has a very masculine leading energy, then that can create a lot of conflict.
Hmm.
Because at some point, if that is you and you're watching this, and you have a man and he becomes less and he becomes feminine because he's in competition with you, there will be a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, and he will become something that he's going to regret and hate, and that you will lose respect for.
That's
Women
it too.
naturally don't have as much respect for men who are more feminine than they do masculine.
Right. 100%.
So I think really what it comes down to is just, let's change this term of toxic masculine. Just learn to embrace what makes a man unique.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the last point for toxic masculinity is the whole notion of equity versus equality. So, people are pushing for equality amongst the sexes. Well, the thing is, like I said before, we're not equal. We are not the same in many aspects. Men and women are designed differently. Like it's just a fact. It is what it is. But when you're talking about equity, then that's a little bit different. Of course, we don't want women to feel oppressed. We don't want women to feel like they have to go through relationships that are abusive, and vice versa for men. Men should not be going through, because there's very toxic relationships where men are actually in very abusive relationships with their female counterpart. And that isn't okay. It's never okay to be, subjected to something like that. But it's understanding where we're pushing for equality amongst men and women. What makes it equal? What is it about men and women that is equal? We are different, and it's beautiful to be different in so many ways. But the equity part is where I think people are struggling to identify what is needed and what isn't, and that whole balance part, because equality, equality, being equal, and I always say this, what is equal for you or what you think you deserve may not be what somebody else needs or, wants at that time. So the equity piece I can understand, but being equal at certain parts of, people's lives, it's different. The needs are different. The biological factors are different. And people need to understand, what is it that is making you want so much equality between something that is so different.
And I like the way you separated that. And for me, equity means value.
Hmm.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right. So, I mean, if we
Yeah.
want to talk about toxic masculinity and just really focusing on behaviors,
Yeah.
well, I mean, it's always so easy to point out what's wrong and
Yeah.
what's negative. But in this case, if you are in a relationship, you're watching this, what can you focus on that you can value that is so different than what you have, that doesn't make you equal and that you can appreciate?
Exactly.
And
Yes.
so I just have one last thing I want to do
Hmm.
to offer this. And maybe you are watching this and you're with a man who has some toxic behaviors and you don't know what to do. One thing that I would recommend is, you know, what you no longer tolerate can change.
Hmm.
And so what I would do is, especially as a man, is let them know that, you know what, I love you. And in a society where men feel so replaceable today than ever before, make sure you're very clear on a couple things. One, when you have your conversation, when we get into the headspace of this man is not replaceable, this is the man that I love, and I need him to know that first and foremost. And then number two, you need to address the toxic behavior. What is this specifically, this toxic behavior that I can no longer accept? And three, what is the game plan or the strategy that I can come up with that I talk to him that he knows he has to break through and change this? Because what you no longer tolerate in someone, they are forced to change.
Mm-hmm.
But if you aren't specific, if you aren't direct and don't use threats and fear, but lead with love and acceptance and say, I'm here for you with this ride, but I can no longer tolerate this, then that behavior is forced to change.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, then you could also make a decision to move forward in a different way.
100%. And I think that's the hardest part for people. You see this in, a variety of situations where it's like people accept certain behaviors, but then there's like that one pinnacle point in their life where it's like, why have I accepted it? Why do I continue to be a part of something that doesn't serve that person as a whole, and that it's that whole genuine piece of, well, equity, because obviously equality is very different amongst, like we said, amongst the genders. But I think you're right. I think it's understanding what it is that you're holding on to and are afraid to let go of, right? Because there is a part of you that needs that inner peace. And if you're struggling with a behavior, if you're a man or a woman in a relationship, and the behaviors, not the characteristics, because we all know that the masculine and the feminine characteristics are needed, especially, like we were just talking about in the beginning of this video, the coronavirus. What happens if this does become a pandemic? What characteristics do you want your partner to have so that you know that they got your back? Of
Hey,
course
can you be a man again, please?
Yeah, exactly, right? That's when you're going to ask people to
Yeah.
turn up their masculinity. However, we need to divide the characteristics from the behavior. I think that's the most essential part. Whether you're a man or a woman, you have to divide the characteristics of someone's makeup, which could be an amazing thing, especially if you're an entrepreneur, if you're someone who plays sports, that kind of thing. You want someone who's a go-getter. You want someone who's a leader. You want someone who's competitive. Those are not negative things. It's when the behaviors become very abusive and toxic are an external factor to someone else.
Yeah. And I just have one last thing.
Yeah.
A relationship should not be turned into a competition.
No.
It should be complementary.
Of course.
So if you're trying to turn it into a competition, it means you're trying to be better than, which means you're not appreciating the unique capability that they bring being different than you. And that's where we're getting lost in this equality and toxic this and that. Forget about that term that it even exists. Let's just throw it out the window. Yeah. And let's just find a way to make a relationship complementary and not a competition.
And there should be so much harmony. And I mean, the people, like, here's the thing, people get so fixated on, and I've been in that position too, until like you realize and you grow and you understand what it is you have to work on too. People get so fixated on what if, this might turn out this way. Well, what if, and it's in those moments where you truly connect with who you are as a person. And, always wanting to one up somebody just because you think that that's what you're meant to do. Well, you're not really meant to do that. And that's when you get tired and exhausted and you strain yourself. And that's when you disconnect from who you are really, truly meant to be.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. So I don't know if you have anything else to say on this topic.
No, I don't think so. But I just think that, if you really want to bring goodness into the world, really start learning to appreciate what is different about us. And that's male to female. Like we were raised in an environment where I never heard of any of this trash. Like it almost makes me sick that I hear about this toxic masculinity, toxic femininity. Everyone's going around shaming each other. And look, what's the cost of this? Yeah. Divorce is on the rise. Suicide is on the rise, mostly comprised of men. So the question is, how do we make relationships last? How do we bring down the suicide rate in men? This is what has to be the fundamental focus,
Yeah.
not trying to find a way to shame or focus on the toxic side of what we have going on
Mhm.
here.
Yeah. And, I want to really shout out to Sean Whalen, who, if you are on his Instagram page, go check out his latest post on relationships. It's
I
very,
know it was
very,
phenomenal. I watched that.
yeah,
I actually read it. It was amazing.
it was fantastic. And
Yeah.
and I mean, he's a very masculine man, but his points to relationships, um, it's very, very true to today.
Do you
You're
want to
coming,
pop that up? His Instagram
Sean
on it?
Whalen.
Yeah, it's SEAN. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking at the other day. I was blown away. He's so raw and vulnerable.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's fucking tough as nails, and
Yeah,
he's
he
as
is.
masculine as they come.
Yeah. So I just wrote his name in our chat.
Yeah.
So, but definitely go check that out. And it's just a different perspective, right? How he is a man and he's, probably pegged as someone who might have toxic masculine behaviors, if you're on the other end of the spectrum. I mean, but there's nothing further from the truth than, he isn't any of those things. Um, but he just does get a little bit real in this post. And I think it's worth checking out. So,
Yeah.
on that note, please don't forget once again to smash the like button, to hit the notification bell, and to subscribe. Please support, content creators on YouTube do their best to provide you with the best information that we can. And the best way that you can support us is just by supporting, and possibly sharing, to someone who might need to hear some of this stuff.
And guys, we're doing this on our own time, just out of complete passion.
Mhm.
And we're trying to get to at least 100 subscribers by the end of this month. So if you wouldn't mind sharing this, our channel with other people, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We appreciate your help in growing this.
Right. All right. So we will see you guys next week.